And we're on. We're in Genesis chapter 18. We're going to finish up, hopefully, this chapter. I think we should this week. And next week, we will delve into the story of the doom of Sodom and Gomorrah. I don't want to start that. Whatever we do tonight, if we get done early, we get done early. I don't want to get into that in the middle and then have to leave off and come back to it. So we will look at this very interesting story of Abraham and God talking about Sodom and Gomorrah and what's going to be going on down there. Before we start talking about it, let's read a little bit of it, shall we? Genesis chapter 18, verses 16 through 21. Then the men rose up from there and looked down toward Sodom, and Abraham was walking with them to send them off. The Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Since Abraham will surely become a great and mighty nation, and in him all the nations of the earth will be blessed. For I have chosen him so that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring upon Abraham what he has spoken about him." And the Lord said, "The outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is indeed great, and their sin is exceedingly grave. I will go down now and see if they have done entirely according to its outcry, which has come to me, and if not, I will know." Okay, just a little bit of context. Again, last week we started in Genesis chapter 18 with the story of the three men appearing, and one way of understanding that threesome is the Father, Son, Spirit, all appearing before Abraham. Abraham welcoming them, killing the fatted calf, kind of scurrying around and getting Sarah to cook some bread for them and hosting them, feeding them, giving them something to drink, and refreshing them on their journey. Abraham and Sarah are promised once again in a year. Sarah will be holding their child Isaac, and Sarah is in the tent and hears that and laughs inside the tent and denies the laughter, but she did laugh. So we looked at that and we saw kind of the remarkable nature of Abraham's hospitality. And Mark made the comment that he must have had some appreciation for the significance of these three people to act as he did, to be such a gracious host as he was. And I think that's an important point as we shift into the second part of this chapter.
Rick,
So,
before
yes,
you
sir.
go there, Mark mentioned it last week. It's amazing the time frame. There was a whole lot of cooking that went on, butchering and cooking and all of that kind of stuff. And so evidently there's a time frame here that they've spent together prior to even sitting down and having the meal.
Yes, and he starts out by offering bread and water, and then he does a whole lot better than that.
Right.
With the host. So there is communion, if you will, between the visitors and Abraham. They are talking, and it's getting to know one another, I guess you could say, in a way, but actually more just coming together in God's presence is there with Abraham. He is experiencing the presence of the Lord in a way that is new, perhaps, and certainly rare in the course of human events. So, yes, they do dwell together, at least for a time. Anything else on the setup and then our reading tonight?
It's kind of interesting to me that the Lord's already going to talk to Abraham about what he's going to do. You know, he pretty well got it figured out to start with, and it's interesting that he thought he would share that knowledge with Abraham. I'm going to go down there and see what's really going on, if it's as bad as you tell me, or they say it. It's toast.
It's kind of him considering Abraham worthy
Yeah,
to be included
right,
in God's plans.
right.
Good, bad, whatever. Abraham is deemed worthy to be notified of it. Sherry and Mindy both say good evening and hello, everybody. So, Mindy, I'm watching your parents right now, and so far they're being good, boy and girl, so you're okay with them right now. We're just glad they're here. We haven't seen them much lately, so it's nice that they're feeling like we can come. So, okay. Shall I hide it from Abraham? He's going to be the head of all these nations. This is going to be the father of my people. Shall I keep what I am doing from him? Again, he's going to be a blessing to the whole earth. All the nations of the earth will be blessed through him. That's kind of the part we maybe latch on to. This is a Christian aspect of the message that through Abraham's house, the whole nation, all nations of the earth will be blessed, including his own nation, but all nations. And we think of that being fulfilled in the personage of Jesus Christ.
Abraham had Abraham had a connection to this place in that his nephew, Lot, is on there. And I don't know, I got the idea that whenever Abraham had gone and rescued Lot and rescued the kings of Sodom and all that stuff, he didn't think too much of those people. At that point, I mean, you get the idea he did that, but you get the idea that he did it for Lot and his family, because he wanted nothing to do at all with Sodom. And I don't know, whenever he says this to him, I can think that God knows that Abraham has a love for his nephew, knows that he has a caring for him, and then the things that go on after this, I think that that's probably something to do with Abraham bargaining. If you can find just a few people, will you save the place? In a way, I see that as him kind of pleading with God for any righteousness that his nephew might have.
Okay. Keep those thoughts in mind about Lot's righteousness for next week. But yes, you're right. Abraham has a connection to the community. He's not maybe in love with that area, but he did not want to be enriched by restoring Sodom and Gomorrah's wealth to them. He didn't want to take a cut of it. He did pay his men off and all of that, but he didn't want to be personally enriched by it. And he does have the concern, the familial concern of Lot being there. Lot is tying. I think some parents in here might be able to identify with when your kid drags you into something you would rather stay out of, like Little League Baseball or whatever, Girl Scouts, something maybe you wish you didn't have to participate in, but now you're getting to do that. Well, it's a little more serious than that, and God is on the verge of pronouncing judgment against Sodom and Gomorrah, and before he does that, he's going to, for the benefit of Abraham, or perhaps for the benefit of Lot, let Lot's uncle, who he thinks very highly of, who he just spent the afternoon with, in on the plan. So yes, that's kind of what's going on here.
Is that why Abraham was pleading with the Lord?
Well, we'll look at that.
About
Yeah,
destroying?
he perhaps, I'm sure it's fair to surmise that he had concern for his own nephew, but of course it goes beyond that in his negotiations. He's trying to do more than just, he doesn't say, Lord, let me go get Lot out of there first or anything like that. So.
But it says that he he approached them and asked, do you plan to destroy the good people along with the evil ones?
Mm-hmm.
And then he says, if there are 50 good people in that city, will you still destroy it?
We're getting ahead. We're getting into the next section, and that's okay. We'll get there. But kind of setting up this before the negotiations begin, the relationship that's being presented to us between God and Abraham. I think it's interesting. We've talked about it, and we're going to see a more interesting example or kind of counterpoint. We believe that God is all powerful, all knowing, everywhere. He's everything. So this idea of God being all knowing, and yet in this passage, and we're going to come back to it, this isn't the strongest kind of challenge to that notion. And I'm not saying he doesn't know everything, but I'm saying this challenges that notion that I will go down, verse 21, and see if they have done entirely according to its outcry, which has come to me. And if not, I will know. That's kind of an interesting statement coming directly from God, implying that right now I don't know. I've heard. He knows it's bad, but is it as bad as he's heard? So, yes.
The commentary on this, on that verse, it says, this is not a denial of God's infinite knowledge, but a figurative way of stating that he does not act out of ignorance or on the basis of mere complaints. I just found that interesting that that was their comment on that, about how that it's just, that he just doesn't act on a whim.
But does that really solve the question? I mean, you're saying he doesn't act on complaints, or the commentator is saying he doesn't act on complaints. Doesn't God know immediately if the complaints are completely valid or partially valid or invalid?
I think a lot of this is, well, I started to say on our behalf, but I guess it muddies the water on our behalf sometimes with some of this information. God can do whatever he wants to do, and for some reason he did it this way.
Well, God could have done a lot of things in liberating Israel from Egypt, couldn't he?
Yeah.
He knew ahead of time Pharaoh was going to resist him. Pharaoh was going to disobey him. And it builds up the case.
Right.
God, sometimes people say God is an image conscious. I think God is very image conscious. I mean, Jesus as the Logos, it's not just word, spoken word. Logos, the image of God. I mean, we're created in the image of God. And we're going to kind of look at that more as it comes out. But God, there is a righteousness to his judgment, and part of that is hearing both sides of the case, isn't it? And if everything is absolutely predetermined already, if God knows what's going to happen, then that takes at least some level of agency away from us, doesn't it? In some ways, that's good.
Well, again, here we go trying to figure out God. God, because he's at the end, knows what the outcome is going to be. But he gives us, like we said, free will for at the moment, even though God knows what's going to happen, at the moment he's dealing with the situation as it is ongoing. That doesn't mean he doesn't know what the outcome is going to be, because he's there in judgment already. He knows what the outcome is.
Okay. Keep that in mind. Again, like I said, this isn't the strongest challenge to that kind of conventional wisdom that God already knows everything. I think it is a pushback and a calling to God's people to reject the concept of fatalism, that it's already set in stone. Nothing can change. It doesn't matter what we do. The outcome is predetermined.
And I don't think that either. Just because he knows what the outcome is eventually, and sitting there on the other side of judgment, he knows what happened. He knows what's going to happen. That doesn't mean that to me, that doesn't take away from that end statement. That anything that happens along the way, the people's right to change their mind, their right to do this, or even for him to change his mind, that doesn't take away to me from the the all-knowingness of God at the end.
Okay.
The problem is we're trying to figure out how he can do that at the end, be that way at the end, and yet deal with the situation right here like he is. Well, he can do a lot of
As
things.
already
that
said,
we don't understand.
Is anything too difficult for me?
Right.
So it's there is this concept of time, which is a very human concept, but it's one God gave us too, though, isn't it? 6 days I created, the seventh day I rest. That's time, isn't it? I mean, there's going to be stars and for seasons and all. That's, God, an infinite God creates a finite existence for us. Every one of us in here is a finite being, right? Some of us are more reminded of that every day, and some of us maybe, getting younger every day. I don't know, but so the concept of this, and it's not that I think to some extent we do try to know and understand God. Paul said, "Who can understand the mind of God?" But we have the mind of Christ. In Christ, and again, you can take these same dilemmas and put them into the context of Christ. Were the people absolutely required to crucify Jesus? Was Judas absolutely predetermined? He had no choice in the matter but to betray Jesus. Did Peter have no choice but to deny Jesus? Jesus prophesied, "You're going to deny me." So Peter now he can't help it anymore. He's not responsible for it anymore. So this is, again, it's something we're going to look at, and there's a really more powerful challenge to that. And I'm not saying he doesn't know everything. I'm not trying to say that, but I am trying to say that he is going to act justly. And he, as a judge, as a righteous judge, and as we try to judge, we shouldn't, be judges generally speaking, but we have to make decisions sometimes. You might get on jury duty sometimes, and maybe you run for judge sometime. I don't know, but you try to be a righteous judge, a fair judge, and see what's going on. He's going to build the case. And chapter 19, we see the case is built very strongly. Right? Okay, so this is what's going on here. God is setting up to build up the case against Sodom.
And God, as an infinite being, he has the power to act in a space where he is at that moment. Like this is the moment he's standing there talking to Abraham. And he can act accordingly, even though this other information exists. He is reacting to the current situation as if he didn't have all of that other knowledge. He has that ability to divorce himself from the end being and talk to Abraham on a time matter as it is at that point in time.
Yes. And we've already seen God repenting of creating humans in the story leading up to the flood. We will see in the book of Exodus, we see Moses changing God's mind. Jesus praying to God to change his mind. If God never changes his mind, and if everything is predetermined, then why pray? Yes, we have to obey, but why? If I'm going to die tomorrow, if I find out, Rick, you're terribly ill and you're going to die tomorrow, I'd say, well, that explains a lot, but no. But if they told me that, am I misplaced in praying for more time? Was Hezekiah misplaced in praying for more time? What's Loretta's song? Everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. So that's again, some of this concept of understanding time and understanding infiniteness. Even we are trying to comprehend infiniteness from a finite perspective. And what does that mean, and what are the ramifications of that? But God is going to give, in a sense, he's going to give, and we see with these negotiations, he's willing to change his mind right here. He's willing to negotiate.
It's interesting, maybe the statement was there so that Abraham would know there was some area to negotiate.
Mm-hmm.
If God said that to anybody, why? It would indicate that there's some time or there's some negotiations that could ensue. And
Kind of an ultimate impact of total predetermination or predestination, or whatever you want to call it. Ultimately, it robs people of hope. There's no hope. There's nothing to hope for. It's either we're there or we're not. That's it. What's there to hope for? There's nothing to fear, in a sense, because there's nothing you do about it. But there is a cause for despair if you feel like you're out of it and there's no challenge to it either. There's no point in trying to strive and grow and become more mature and more able to serve God in the kingdom. I'm already in.
Or I'm already out.
But Paul said, I'm striving so that I don't, after bringing all these other people to Christ, I'm not left out. If anybody would think, and even under the law, if anybody had confidence to think, hey, I've got it, I punched my ticket already. It's hard to, now, of course, Paul has got a lot of baggage too, before he becomes a Christian. But God's people I don't think are supposed to live. We live with both. We live with the idea that God is in control, that God's will be done, even though now it's not always done. I think we see on the nightly news every night God's will not being done on earth. So we have these challenges. We live with both. We live hoping for the future, hoping for God's will to be fully implemented in our existence, with the knowledge and the reality that it isn't yet. We live in the now, yearning for the not yet, but with hope based on what has already happened. So this is some of the stuff that is starting to give the descendants. Abraham's going to be a great nation. All nations of the earth are going to be blessed by Abraham. This gives those people that come from Abraham, either physically or spiritually, this hope. One thing it does, hope. Sodom and Gomorrah at this point still have hope. Hollywood still has hope, believe it or not. I'm sure there's wonderful Christian people in Hollywood, California. I've met some in Las Vegas, but never Hollywood. But I'm sure they're there. Let's get into the negotiations now. Verse 22. Then the men turned away from there and went toward Sodom, while Abraham was still standing before the Lord. Abraham came near and said, "Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you indeed sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous and the wicked are treated alike. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth deal justly?" So the Lord said, "If I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then I will spare the whole place on their account." And Abraham replied, "Now behold, I have ventured to speak to the Lord, although I am but dust and ashes. Suppose the 50 righteous are lacking 5. will you destroy the whole city because of 5? And he said, I will not destroy it if I find 45 there. He spoke to him yet again and said, suppose 40 are found there. I will not do it on account of the 40. Then he said, oh, may the Lord not be angry, and I shall speak. Suppose 30 are found there. I will not do it if I find 30 there. And he said, now behold, I have ventured to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there. I will not destroy it on account of the 20. Then he said, oh, may the Lord not be angry, and I shall speak only this once. Suppose 10 are found there. And he said, I will not destroy it on account of the 10. And as soon as he finished speaking to Abraham, the Lord departed, and Abraham returned to his place. God was not going to deal anymore. He'd already gotten taken to the cleaners by Abraham. Some sharp dealing here.
Patience. Obviously, the Lord is patient.
Well, you love Abraham's negotiating techniques, don't you? If you destroy it for 50, but you won't do it for 50, but you will for 45, then you're really destroying it for 5, aren't you?
No.
I mean, if you'll buy this car at $20,000, but you won't buy it at $22,500, then you're not buying it for $2,500, aren't you? That sort of deal. Abraham's a pretty good negotiator, isn't he?
I wonder how he is buying truck.
Well, the fact is,
He'd tell you to hold on to old blue.
what my thought is, how patient God is to go through this. How ridiculous is this for the God to sit here and negotiate with this? Like he says, what am I, ash and dust, But it's,
Abraham's just a man, but he's the man God called. He's the man God bound himself to. And it was that God's decision to bring Abraham in. So you're going to bring him in. Maybe you ought to listen to him. What's the point in bringing him in if you're just going to ignore him anyway? I think humor, because you feel Abraham kind of whiny and snivelly and kind of coming up with all, and God's voice is kind of comes across as, okay. It's almost like one word answers each time. Okay. Not for 30, not for 20, not for 10, and that's it. I got to find 10 at least. We don't know if there'd only been 8, what would happen. Then he's destroying it for only 2.
It kind of shows a compassion that Abraham has too for people. He's begging for anybody, who is anybody who's righteous. You save it for anybody, and he probably knows it's a hard sell. But it shows the compassion that Abraham has that he didn't want there to be destruction for righteous people.
It would be like a timeshare guy trying to sell me a timeshare. It would be a hard sell for many reasons, but mainly because I don't have the money, but for other reasons as well. But it's a hard sell. And in a sense, he is doing it on behalf. He's trying to protect the righteous. Will you sweep away the righteous with the unrighteous? Sometimes God does. I mean, when Judah falls into Babylonian captivity, not every Jew in Judah was wicked. Some of them were righteous. And they go off into captivity too. Sometimes he does. You go back, and one of my favorite things about the fall of Jerusalem is the treatment of Jeremiah the prophet, because the Jewish leadership treated him terribly. They were horrible to Jeremiah. And as soon as Jerusalem falls and the Babylonians take over, his situation improves dramatically. But what happens with Jeremiah? He still mourns Jerusalem. He still grieves the loss of his people, of his city, of his home. Jeremiah mourns in part for the righteous, but he also mourns for the unrighteous, that God poured out judgment on the unrighteous. What Abraham is doing here is not just pleading for the sake of the righteous. He's pleading for the sake of the unrighteous. He's saying, don't treat the righteous and the unrighteous the same, but he is saying, treat the righteous and the unrighteous the same, graciously. Forgive them. Keep them all alive. Don't kill any of them. And how can you, the judge of all the earth, treat the righteous and the unrighteous the same? How does that look, God? How does it look, God, if you lead your people up out of Israel into the wilderness and then you kill them all? How does that look? Who said that?
Moses.
Abraham is a flawed man, but he's God's chosen man, and he is presented to us. If the slavery and the other stuff cancels us out for you, I understand, that's fine. Maybe we can talk about it later. But the gist of the story, what we're supposed to take from it, is that Abraham is a righteous man. Even with all this other stuff, he's a righteous man. This is the righteous throwing himself between an angry God and a bunch of wicked people. He's not just trying to save his nephew. He's trying to save two cities that are exceedingly wicked, whose cry of wickedness had gone up before God. He's ready to destroy them. Abraham jumps in the middle. Abraham is trying to jump on the grenade before it blows up a bunch of unrighteous people. This righteous man who has everything to live for, who has not gotten his son of promise yet, is ready to die to protect a bunch of unrighteous people. Does that sound like anyone else? The ultimate child of promise. Jesus did not call the righteous, he called the unrighteous. He didn't come to heal the well, he came to heal the sick. He didn't come to clean the teeth of people who already had clean teeth. He came to clean the teeth of people like me earlier today. Tammy got to see me cry like a little girl today at her office. And this is Abraham, supernova Abraham, rock star of faith Abraham, off the charts Abraham, unprecedented, intervening on behalf of the unrighteous, the people who deserve to be destroyed. Abraham is trying to save them. It would be so much easier if there were 10 righteous people there just to get the 10 people out. That's not how this is working. We're going to look at it more next week. You may feel like you live in Sodom and Gomorrah. You may think Walla Walla and College Place are Sodom and Gomorrah now. Especially when you throw Milton Freewater into it. I don't think anyone here thinks that, but even if you do, you don't check out, do you? I don't understand how a person of faith could live in that city. Abraham is going to bat for those two cities. Abraham is ready to die for those two cities. That's our spiritual forefather. Not washing his hands, not turning his back on them. Every time just chipping away at God's standard, getting him down. Lower it, God, lower it, God, lower it, God. Think about another prophet of God, a guy named Jonah. How righteous was Jonah? It's okay to say not at all if you want to. Where is Jonah's heart at the end? So glad that God spared the city of Nineveh, so filled with joy at God's exceedingly, he didn't even go to Nineveh to preach repentance, did he? He just went there to tell them, God's about to destroy you. God's going to rain hellfire down on Nineveh. They repent, God relents. Jonah is happy, right?
Not really.
Never. And why does he explain why he ran the opposite direction? Because he didn't know God? Because he knew God. Because I knew you are a merciful God, slow to anger, quick to forgive. I knew if I came here and preached to them, they'd repent and you would forgive them, God. And I don't want you to forgive them. I want you to destroy them. We try to make Jonah the good guy. That story. He is not the good guy. That story. It doesn't end with Jonah, okay, now I understand God. The tree died, all that. Yeah, I got it now. It doesn't end like that. He ends angry. Jonah is angry at the end of the book. Angry that God spared human life. We are not children of Jonah. We are children of Abraham. We may have to get between an angry God. There's a famous old sermon from the colonial days, I think, before America declared its independence, called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. When Abraham sees sinners in the hands of an angry God, he tries to soothe God's anger. He tries to get God to commit, to enter into a covenant that he will not destroy these people if only a few minor conditions are met. Now we know those conditions aren't met, can't be met, won't be met. But that doesn't diminish the courage on display and the calling the children of Abraham have, which is to reach out. Yes, the world around us is broken. We see wickedness. We see it in our own neighborhoods sometimes, and we certainly see it on the evening news. That doesn't give us permission to check out. That doesn't give us permission to not care what happens to people anymore. It gives us a calling to get between them and God, because God's angry, but he loves us. And he really loves them too. And the main image that comes out every year is not God's image, but Abraham's image. One who loves his neighbor, even when his neighbor is unlovable. Anyone else have any last thoughts on it? Mr. Kelso, will you lead us in a closing prayer, please?